we've been trying to build things up to Exodus 19, and I'm going to try to do some more of that today as we jump into the text. So we're in Exodus 18, and we're doing the second, half of it, Exodus 18, verses 13 through 27. But I want to spend a little bit of time on review. As you know, it goes, it's like what? Because we do alternating, and so it's a few weeks between these lessons on Exodus, and so it's easy to forget, what we covered last time. And so, by way of review, I got some points up there. Last time we looked at Jethro, right? And what do you guys remember about Jethro? Oh, Jethro. I call him Jethro for a second. Jethro. What do you guys remember about Jethro?
Father-in-law.
Father-in-law to Moses, right? What else do we remember? He's a priest. What kind of priest?
Good one.
He's a good one. The text specifically notes he's a priest of, you just said it? Yeah, Midian, right? Priest of Midian. And so he's outside the people of Israel. He's from the Midianites, who are descended from Abraham. So they're related, right? And they're as terms of peoples, but also Jethro is Moses' father-in-law. And so what happens? He hears about what?
He hears about what happened through the Red Sea crossing and all that stuff. Basically what God has done for Israel.
Right, yeah, he hears all the things that God had done for Israel and what he had done to the Egyptians. And he comes to Moses and he returns Moses' family to him. And so we discussed a little bit about how at some point, likely prior to Moses and Aaron going to Pharaoh, he had left his family with Jethro, right? So he returns his family, and Moses, even though Jethro's heard all this stuff, Moses tells him everything, and it specifically says it. He tells them all the good things that God has done, and then also the things and the trials and the things that they've gone through, right? So there's triumph and there's adversity in what Moses tells Jethro. He includes all of it, the good and the bad, all the trials they face, and of the deliverance of Yahweh. And what does Jethro do when he hears this news from Moses? He rejoices, right? And he rejoices over all the what? All the good that God had done for Israel. And he says, "Blessed be the Lord who delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. Indeed, it was proven when they dealt proudly against the people." And so, throughout this narrative, and I think we see this in the book of Matthew, just generally, we see contrasting pictures of how people respond to God, right? When Moses and the Israelites were coming out, they're attacked by somebody. Who's that? Do you remember? Moses had to hold up his staff. The Amalekites, right, who are also relatives to the Israelites. And so you have one group attacks Israel, and then you have another group represented by Jethro, a priest of Midian, who brings peace. And so Midian recognizes what the Lord has done, and throughout we see the contrasting pictures of how people respond to his revelation. In the plague narratives, there's that repeated theme that the Lord, Yahweh, the King of the universe, that there is no one like him in all the earth, and that he will make himself known. You remember what Pharaoh said at the beginning of this narrative when Moses and Aaron first approached him, and they made their demands. They said, Yahweh, the Lord, wants us to go out into the wilderness and worship him, right? And what did Pharaoh say?
He said, "Who is the Lord?"
Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice? Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice? And if you recall, when we looked at the plague structures, some of you, if you weren't here, I have it up on the screen here for you. We looked at different ways to structure the plague narrative, the plague narratives, the plagues, right? And so there seems to be different ways to group them, and we covered the plagues as pairs, so they're grouped in twos, according to the Egyptian pantheon, or they could also be grouped according to these triads. And the signal in the text that seems to suggest that is there's repetition in various parts. And so in the first three plagues, it starts with in the morning. So the plague of blood, Moses goes to Pharaoh in the morning. The command, let my people go, and then there's this rationale given, right? There's this rationale behind it all. By this, and there's a rationale for the plagues. By this you shall know that I am the Lord, was the rationale given for the first three. The second three, again, in the morning, let my people go, in order that you may know that I, the Lord, am in the midst of the land. So it starts off, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Now you will know that I am the Lord and am in the midst of the land. And then the last time that Moses comes to him in the morning, tells him to let my people go, and then these plagues are going to happen so that you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. And we see throughout all of that Pharaoh's heart hardening, right? Becoming more and more stubborn. And so we're given these pictures of the responses of the nations to Yahweh. You have Pharaoh and his stubbornness. You have the Amalekites who come out and fight Israel. You have now Midian, represented by Jethro. And what this, I think, tells me is that God's redemptive program has always involved the nations as well. The nations have always had a choice about how they should respond to Yahweh, to the Lord. And here we have Jethro, a Midianite priest, technically a Gentile. He's a descendant from Abraham. So he would have had some knowledge of the God of his fathers. But he comes now, he hears and he sees the deliverance of God, and he acknowledges him for who he is. He is the God of the universe, and there is no one like him. In contrast to Pharaoh, who says, "Who is the Lord that I shall obey his voice?" Jethro says, "Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods." We also discussed last time Jethro and Melchizedek, and there were some interesting parallels there. Just as Abraham was approached by Melchizedek after the battle of I can't say the Amphel, I don't know. I think it's also the battle of the 5 kings. That's what it's known for. After that battle, Melchizedek comes to Abraham. We have this battle with the Amalekites. Now Jethro comes. Both are priests. And they both seem to be presented as righteous priests. And so I think we went through a lot of parallels, some of which you guys picked up that I hadn't seen before. For example, both of them, in both instances, a relative was restored. In the case of Abraham, it was Lot. In the case of Moses, his wife and children. What's interesting of note is that after the meeting with Melchizedek, in chapter 15 of the text, it says in verse 18 that God made a covenant with Abraham. And I think these parallels between Jethro and Melchizedek give us a hint, give us a clue that something is about to happen to the people of Israel. Something's about to happen. Here you go. Like I said earlier, small church, things happen. For those of you online, there's just a huge crash in the background there. Something's about to happen. Something's about to happen. One thing I also think is interesting is that when you compare Genesis 15:7, right at the beginning of that narrative there where God makes the covenant with Abraham, it says, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess it. And then in Exodus 22, right before the Ten Commandments, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So almost identical greetings to these things. It's interesting to me. And so not only is there, I think, parallels between Jethro and Melchizedek, I think there's interesting parallels between the life of Abraham, the man of faith, and the life of Moses, the man of the law, the man through whom the law came. There's also important contrasts. And so we are now left with Jethro, the father-in-law, a Midianite priest, a righteous Gentile priest, who sees the provision of the Lord. He sees the salvation of the Lord, the blessing of Yahweh. He sees that there's no one like him, and he's accepted into the community of Yahweh worshipers. If you recall, he offers sacrifices, and they come and eat a meal with him. So now we're at the point in the text where he comes to provide counsel to Moses. So before we go any further, we'll pray, and I'm also going to get some volunteers to read through this next section here. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord God, we just thank you for this text. Help us, Lord, to understand it. Help us, Lord, to, through our understanding, we are just built up in our faith and our knowledge of you, our love of you. Lord God, I just pray that through our study of your word, whether it's here in this text or anywhere else, Lord, that we are built up, that we cling to you. We cling to your word, knowing, Lord, that you have the words of life for us. Increase our understanding. Increase our love. We just thank you again for your word. May we learn from it and be more and more made into the image of Christ. Amen. All right, so it's kind of a longer section than last time in terms of actual words. If I could get, let's see here, 1, 2, 3. If I could get, let's get 4 volunteers. No, let's get 4 volunteers. If I could get somebody to read, we're in Exodus 18, starting in verse 13, and read through 16. Anybody? Oh, Rick. Okay, Rick will do that first chunk there. If I could get somebody to read, this is a longer section, verses 17 through 23. Tammy. And then one last person to read verses 24 through 27. Andrew? Awesome. All right. Whenever you're ready.
It came about the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood about Moses from the morning until the evening. Now when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you're doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge, and all the people stand about you from morning until evening?" Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I judge between a man and his neighbor, and make known the statutes of God and his laws."
"What you're doing is not good," Moses' father-in-law said to him. "You will certainly wear out both yourself and these people who are with you, because the task is too heavy for you. You can't do it alone. Now listen to me. I will give you some advice, and God be with you. You be the one to represent the people before God and bring their cases to him. Instruct them about the statutes and laws and teach them the way to live and what they must do. But you should select from all the people able men, God-fearing, trustworthy, and hating bribes. Place them over the people as commanders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They should judge the people at all times. Then they can bring you every important case, but judge every minor case themselves. In this way, you will lighten your load, and they will bear it with you. If you do this, and God so directs you, you will be able to endure, and also all these people will be able to go home satisfied.
So Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law and did that he had said. Moses chose able men out of all of Israel and made them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands and hundreds of fifties and of tens. And they judged the people at all times. Any hard case they brought to Moses, but the small matter they decided themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went away from his own country.
Thank you. So we have this very interesting encounter with Jethro and Moses. We see in the first part we did last time, Jethro comes to him. He rejoices in the goodness that God had done. He offers sacrifice, and he's welcomed to the community. And so now, the very next day, it says, he observed Moses and what he's, his role as adjudicator of the disputes for the people of Israel. And I guess there's just so many, you imagine the multitude of people, and you have one guy, and they're coming because they want to what? What does the text say? They want to inquire of God. And so you have Moses here who stands between the people and God. And so they come to him, right? He's the one who, God has been leading Israel out. Moses essentially being his mouthpiece to them. And so they want to come to him to settle their disputes, to have their cases judged. And Jethro observed this and asks, why is it this way? He sees how they're just standing all day long. And I imagine that they stand all day long, and those who are still left in line at the end of the day, they have to go home and start over again, right? And so just from a logical standpoint, Jethro sees that this is not going to work, right? This is not efficient. This is not helpful. And so what does Jethro say about it? What's his initial response? He had rejoiced over the goodness that the Lord had done. He sees all this, and how does he describe the situation initially?
He says it's not good.
Right. Yeah, he says, his father-in-law said to him, the thing that you are doing is not good. And so before, he rejoices in the good that the Lord had done, and now he sees this thing and says, this is not good. This is not good. And then what does he say after that? Right. Yeah, you're going to wear yourself out, and you're going to wear the people out. And he says, you cannot do it alone. He says, this is not good, and you cannot do it alone. It's not good, and Moses shouldn't be alone. It's too much for him to bear. So I think that the theme of this section here is that Moses cannot do this alone. He cannot carry the burden. And I think this is really important because I think it supports the idea that we've presented before and what I think is said explicitly in Exodus 19 regarding God's intention for man, and now here his intention for Israel, to make them a kingdom of priests. If you go to Exodus 19:6, it says, I will make you a kingdom of priests. And as I've argued previously, I think that is God's intention for man. A couple lessons ago, we went back to Genesis and looked at the, what God did. He took the man and placed him in the garden, and I argued the reading should be caused him to rest, and there he would worship and serve or worship and obey. And I think that's God's intention for man, to rest in God's provision and to worship and obey him. And so here we have Moses doing the work of ministry, right? He speaks to God on behalf of the people, and he speaks to the people on behalf of God. But there's just so much. He's going to wear out. He can't bear the load. There's too many disputes. There's too many lines of people waiting for him to get involved. It's too much. And so Jethro sees this and says, it's not good. It's not good that you're doing this alone. Moses needs to multiply himself, right? And so, what does Jethro say in verse 19? What does he say in verse 19?
He says, I will give you advice, and God be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. And you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws, and make them know in the way in which they must walk and what they must do. And then he tells them to look for men to put over like these groups of people, basically.
Yeah, so the first part is what I want to key in on. Yours said, come and I will give you advice, something like that. That's what you're...
Yeah, I will... now obey my voice, I will give you advice, and God be with you.
There you go. Now obey my voice. Some might say, listen to me. It's interesting. It is obey my voice or listen to my voice. Right? Hear my voice, which we'll get into that in a second. It's interesting. I do think that what Jethro is doing here is godly counsel, right? And if you go to verse 23, we see that Jethro says, if the Lord commands you, then do it. And then what does Moses do? He does it, right? This is godly counsel he's receiving. But I want to key in on the whole listening to my voice. We see this phrase used a lot in the Bible. It was Pharaoh who said to Moses and Aaron, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? I'm reminded of the garden, which we've gone back there before through this study, and the curse. And the curse came because Adam did not listen to the voice of God, but it says, because you listen to the voice of the woman, right? He didn't listen to the voice of God. Instead, he listened to the voice of his wife. So we have this situation. I have the verse up. Yeah, there it is. It's all emphasized for you. Listen to my voice. Listen to me. We have the situation here where Moses is alone. What he's doing is not good. And Jethro comes to give him godly counsel. Moses needs to multiply himself. He needs other representatives who what? Fear God, who are men of the truth. And to me, it's like he needs others who bear the image of God well, who represent him. And as we go further in the text, we see that not only is it God's intention that there be other representatives of him, he intends to make Israel a kingdom of priests. He wants Israel to be a people who rests in his provision and who worship and serve him, who listen to his voice. Now, all of this to me is striking because it seems to connect, and it connects back to Genesis. And we see how some of these things are fulfilled when Jesus comes, and will ultimately be fulfilled when he comes again. I think this is important because we often think of these stories as being disconnected. When we read through the Bible, at first glance, it just sometimes the stories feel disconnected, or the themes, or what does Genesis have to do with Exodus, or and we can see historically how things might have connection, but there's There's literary connections in the text. You have God saying to Adam in the garden, what does he say to Adam in the garden after he creates man? And then Adam, names the creatures and sees that they all have appropriate, compatible co-workers or mates, as you were. What does God say to Adam? It looks like Laura really wants to say it. Or Jeremiah's just like trying to get her to say something.
He says, it is not good that man should be alone.
It is not good that man should be alone. It's interesting. It is not good that Moses do this alone. He needs other representatives of God to do the work. He needs others who rest in God, who trust him, who cling to truth. Go ahead.
So Moses needs multiple wives as helpmeets for him.
That is exactly the application I was getting at. I had that in here, but Lydia poured coffee on it, so I wasn't going to say it. I'm just kidding. And so you see God's intention for man. We see the fall. What he originally intended for man. We see the fall. And what you see through the text is God's original intention, this Edenic blessing, where God is with the people. That's always been his intention. And he's going to bring that to the world again. And so the text here is building to something. At the fall, the curse came because Adam did not listen to the voice of God. We move a little bit forward. We see that God tells him it's not good that he be alone. Moving forward into Genesis, you have Abraham. In chapter 22, 18, God says to him, "And in your seed the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have listened to my voice." Here it is again, because you've listened to my voice. And this is even more interesting to me because you have Jethro, who is an outside nation. He comes to Moses and says, "Listen to my voice." And through that, Israel is blessed. Because I think Jethro is righteous and he knows who the Lord is now. He knows who Yahweh is. And so my argument here is that it's always been God's plan to restore the Edenic blessing to the world. Through Israel, blessing would come to the nations. It says, "And in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed." Because Abraham listened to the voice of God. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just had a question. When you say the Edenic blessing, are you referring to the serving and worshiping? Like the resting, serving, and worshiping?
Right.
That's what you're talking about?
I'm referring to God, the original design, the original plan for man, which has always been God's plan. His plan hasn't changed.
Gotcha.
Right? He's working through redemptive history to restore what was lost. And you see in Revelation 21, 22, where it says that when God will dwell with man, and there will be no more suffering, no more tears, and there will be no more curse. That's the end of the book. There will be no more curse. That is when it will finally be ultimately fulfilled. But we can see God working out his plan through redemptive history. And so, if God is going to bring about this blessing, he's going to bring about this restoration, the question comes up, how? How is he going to do that? How is he going to do that? And we have the benefit of having the full text of canon, right? But they had Moses wrote the Pentateuch. They had the law, and so there were pointers. If we jump to Deuteronomy 18, 15 through 19, it says, "Then the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you. From your countrymen you shall listen to him. This is according to all that you asked of the Lord your God in Horeb on the day of the assembly, saying, 'Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God.'" So that's interesting. They, the people, and we'll get to this, do not want to hear the voice of God. But it says, "You shall listen to him. According to all that you asked of the Lord your God in Horeb on the day of the assembly, saying, 'Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God. Let me not see his great fire anymore, or I will die.' The Lord said to me, 'They have spoken well. I will raise up a prophet from among their countrymen like you, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I commanded.'" I wonder if Lydia's... Sorry, I think this is a little bit discombobulated. Here we go. Listen to him. And we get a picture of this in the New Testament, in the book of Matthew. The problem we see in this text is that Moses cannot carry the burden. And what we learn later, the law shows that the people that Moses, the law, nor any of the prophets they have can do it either. The law points to the people's inability. Only God can carry it. Only God can provide rest to the people. But you must listen to him. You must come to him. And in the book of Matthew, we see a lot of this stuff fulfilled. If there's one thing that you want to use to try to keep in mind, like what is going on in Matthew, if you want one word summary, fulfillment. Fulfillment. Before we get to this verse, we see in the book of Matthew, as we've gone through, we looked at the ministry of John. How in Matthew 3:11 it says, of Jesus, he says, "I am not fit to remove his sandal." John was considered the last Old Testament prophet. Jesus talks about this in Matthew 11. We see Jesus going up on the mount, the Sermon on the Mount, which is very interesting because it seems to parallel Moses going up the mount to receive the words, the 10 words. Jesus goes up on the mount and he kind of flips things on its head. You've heard it said, "Thou shalt not murder." But if you look at your brother with anger in your heart, and you've murdered him in your heart, you've heard it said that you shall not lust. But I tell you, if you look at a woman with lust, or your neighbor's wife with lust, then you have lusted in your heart. And so you shall not commit adultery, but if you look at your neighbor's wife with lust, then you have committed adultery in your heart. And so Jesus goes up on the mountain and teaches all these things. He says in Matthew 5:17 that he is the fulfillment. He's come to fulfill the law and the prophets. And then he says in Matthew 11, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." We just looked at Matthew last week, in Matthew 16. And Jeremiah covered that passage on Peter's confession. And coming up to that point, he asked the disciples, "Who do you say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say that John the Baptist, and others Elijah, but still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He's neither of these. He's the one spoken of in Deuteronomy. He's the one to come, the one that they should listen to. He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." In Matthew 17, which we've yet to get to, the transfiguration, it says, while he was still speaking, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And behold, a voice out of the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." And then what does it say? Yeah. Listen to him. Moses cannot carry the burden. He can't. And I think this is a shadow of the fulfillment found in Jesus, because though Moses can't carry the burden, though none of the prophets could carry the burden, no one can carry the burden, but Jesus can. He is the one greater than Moses. He is the one who can carry the burden. He carries the sins of the people. He provides rest for our souls. He won't be worn out. He won't grow tired. In him, we have rest for our souls. In him, there will be the rest of the nations. In Revelation 22, as I mentioned before, speaking of there no longer being a curse, it says also, on either side of the river was the tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. Through this narrative, we've seen how the nations, we've seen their responses. They have different responses to God. But in the end, there will be the healing of the nations. And so, coming back to the text at hand, we see Moses, this one who cannot carry the burden. The people are on the foot of Mount Sinai, and they are about to hear from God. This is where God has been leading them. We've seen through the text up to this point how God is presented as this warrior king of the universe. No nation can stand against him. He's seen as the provider. He's the promise keeper. He's the one in whom the people of Israel should rest and should trust. We see how his desire for man is to relate to him by faith, to rest in his good provision, to worship and obey him, to be priests, to listen to his voice. We've also seen through the text how God has tested Israel. And we've seen them fail and grumble and struggle to trust in God over and over again. And so the question is, what happens at Mount Sinai? The text has been driving to this. What happens at Mount Sinai? This is where God has been taking them. Moses listens to the voice of Jethro, but will Israel listen to the voice of God? And that's what I want to leave you with as we work up to Exodus 19. I think next time we're in Exodus, we will be covering that text. And it's an important text. So it's the reason I went into the New Testament and a lot of these other things is to try to show you a little bit about that fulfillment. That in Christ, we have rest because he carries the burden. Where Moses had to stand between God and all the people, we now have access to God through Jesus Christ. And so, through this text, I think we can be encouraged, not reminded about who can carry our burdens. The one who can carry our burdens has come. It's especially important when we think about that at this Christmas season. Right? We think about the birth of Christ. And what that means, he's come, and he will also come again. He will come again to dwell with us. God will dwell with the people, and he will bring healing and renewal. So with that, are there any questions? It's kind of a shorter lesson today. Any questions on the text? Any questions in general? Got a question? All right. Well, with that, we're going to end in a song, and then we're going to go eat lunch at the Payne's house.